Imagine a wild animal that ravages crops, invades cities, and costs farmers billions, yet somehow becomes a luxury dish served in elite restaurants across the globe. That's the bizarre reality of wild boar meat, but how does 6 million tons of it make its way from forests to fine dining tables every year? You're about to find out. They were never supposed to be here, not in backyards, not on highways, not in the middle of bustling cities. But wild boars have a way of going where they're not wanted and thriving in places where nature never asked them to. Their roots trace back thousands of years, but their current role in the modern world is less about history and more about survival. Ours, not theirs. Originally introduced by humans for hunting or food centuries ago, wild boars are now among the most invasive species on Earth. They're fast, intelligent, aggressive, and shockingly adaptable. A single sow can birth up to a dozen piglets in one litter, and she can do it twice a year. That's not reproduction. That's an invasion strategy. Left unchecked, their population doubles every 8 months. And they don't just survive. They thrive, even in the most unexpected environments. In rural areas, they destroy crops overnight. In cities, they raid garbage bins and chase pets. They dig up roads, damage vehicles, even burst through fences like battering rams. Their snouts act like bulldozers, turning lush farmland into shredded wastelands. In places like Texas, farmers wake up to find entire fields ruined. In Germany, wild boars have wandered into government buildings. In South Korea, they've attacked civilians on sidewalks. And in Italy, they've been caught on camera stealing groceries from shopping carts. They're not picky eaters. Corn, wheat, rice, grapes, melons, truffles. Nothing is safe. They uproot irrigation systems, trample vineyards, and consume entire harvests before a farmer even has a chance to react. And they don't just take, they leave behind a path of destruction. Deep furrows in the ground, exposed roots, broken fences, and stress. Real measurable stress that leads to economic strain, emotional fatigue, and in some cases, people giving up farming altogether. But it's not just the damage they cause. It's what they carry. Wild boars are natural reservoirs for a host of dangerous pathogens: foot and mouth disease, African swine fever, brucellosis, leptospirosis, and E. coli. Their constant movement between wildlands, urban zones, and livestock pastures turns them into biological time bombs. One infected boar crossing a border can trigger quarantines, shutdowns, and livestock culls worth millions. Managing this chaos isn't easy. Hunting offers short-term relief, but often backfires. Kill a few, and the rest disperse, making them even harder to track. Plus, when a population feels pressured, it can increase its reproductive rate, literally accelerating the problem. Poisoning, illegal in many regions. Trapping, expensive, labor-intensive, and only effective in specific terrains. And then there's the ethical debate. These aren't pests in the traditional sense. They're sentient animals with complex behaviors and social structures. Eradication campaigns raise concerns among animal welfare groups, especially when poorly managed. So how do you transform an uncontainable problem into anything that resembles a solution? That's where economics steps in. Over the last 2 decades, governments, private landowners, and entrepreneurs have started looking at wild boars not just as pests, but as products. If they're going to be hunted anyway, why not make the most of it? If the meat is edible, and in many cultures even prized, why not build an industry around it? What followed wasn't a coordinated plan, but an organic shift. As wild boar populations exploded, so did the interest in processing and exporting their meat. In places like Spain, Hungary, and parts of Australia, wild boar meat began making its way into high-end restaurants, luxury food markets, and specialty butcher shops. It was branded not as a pest byproduct, but as a rustic delicacy, earthy, lean, gamey, exotic, everything a premium meat product aspires to be. And demand responded. Europe alone consumes thousands of tons of wild boar meat annually, with Germany and Italy leading the pack. In Japan, it's considered a seasonal treat. In the US, it's rebranded as feral pork and sold under niche organic or sustainable labels. In South Korea, it's used in traditional stews. In upscale restaurants across France, wild boar pâté and terrine are featured on menus next to duck confit and foie gras. But this isn't just a fancy food trend. Behind the scenes is a highly specialized supply chain, built almost entirely in response to an ecological crisis. First, there are the trappers, people with years of experience tracking, baiting, and capturing boars safely and legally. Then the handlers, who transport the animals to specialized processing centers equipped to deal with wild game under strict health regulations. These facilities must meet sanitation standards far beyond those for farm-raised livestock. There's no margin for error when you're dealing with potentially diseased animals. Once processed, the meat is frozen, packaged, and shipped across borders in temperature-controlled containers. It's handled like gold, inspected, tracked, sealed. Some of it ends up in pet food. Some becomes jerky. But a surprising amount lands on the plates of people who have no idea the pork they're savoring once tore through someone's vineyard. Halfway across the world. Ironically, what started as a desperate attempt to reduce wild populations has now created a market incentive to keep the system going. In some regions, hunters are paid for their catches. In others, local governments subsidize meat processing to encourage more participation. Conservationists worry this could backfire, turning invasive species into cash crops and discouraging actual population control. But for now, the math is in favor of export. There's a strange contradiction at the heart of this system. On one side, wild boars are still wreaking havoc, still crashing through fences and ripping up farmland. On the other, they're being neatly trimmed, marinated, and served with rosemary juice. It's a delicate balancing act between managing an environmental threat and profiting from it, all under the watchful eye of international regulators, ethical watchdogs, and health officials. For the general public, though, all of this remains largely invisible. They see the final product, a piece of meat, attractively packaged, maybe with a small label hinting at its wild origins. They don't see the thermal drones used to track the animals. They don't hear the late-night gunshots in rural hillsides. They don't smell the fear of farmers walking into fields torn to shreds overnight. And they certainly don't realize that 6 million tons of this meat are quietly moving through international trade routes every year, out of forests, across oceans, and into homes and restaurants all around the world. It begins far from factories, with no fences, no feeding schedules, no predictable routine. Wild boars don't operate like livestock. They move under cover of darkness, unpredictable, and quick, tearing through fields, suburbs, even city streets. To catch one isn't just about force. It's a matter of skill, patience, and understanding behavior, honed by generations of survival instinct. Trappers use thermal scopes, baited enclosures, remote-triggered nets. Some rely on dogs bred specifically for the chase. Others operate solo, navigating backwoods and borderlands with nothing but a suppressed rifle and timing. What they're chasing isn't just meat. It's a solution disguised as chaos. Every capture removes a threat, but also fuels an industry quietly expanding behind closed doors. Once caught, there's no time to waste. The boars are moved swiftly to licensed game facilities where the real transformation begins. These aren't standard slaughterhouses. They're built for unpredictability. Each animal is different. Some older, some diseased, some full of adrenaline. Health inspections are immediate and strict. The stakes are high. One contaminated carcass could shut the whole line down. Veterinarians examine organs, test for disease, flag anything suspicious. Only what passes moves forward. Butchering isn't rushed. Wild boar meat is lean, coarse, often darker than farm-raised pork. The cuts are handled with precision, then chilled or flash-frozen for shipment. Documentation tracks everything: origin, temperature, handlers, destination. Nothing's left to chance. From there, the supply chain takes over. Pallets loaded into refrigerated containers move through ports, customs, air cargo lanes. Some go to fine dining, others to pet food. A surprising amount ends up in products marketed as artisanal, sustainable, or wild-sourced. All of it began with an animal that likely rooted through a vineyard or crossed a highway hours before capture. What started as a pest control tactic has become a business, and like any business, it adapts. In some places, hunters are paid bounties. Elsewhere, governments subsidize processing costs. The system works, but not without questions. Critics warn that treating wild boars as a renewable resource could backfire. Stories already circulate of intentional releases, unregulated farming, manipulation of population data. When destruction becomes profitable, control turns blurry. Still, the system moves forward. The public rarely sees this part. They notice a gamier flavor, maybe a darker cut, a clever label hinting at something natural. They don't see the traps, the rifles, the inspections, the politics. Most never realize that what they're eating was once considered a threat. An invasive species now moving across continents, not through forests, but through freight. What something is and what people believe it to be are rarely the same. That gap is where wild boar meat lives. It's not just flesh from a feral animal. It's an idea, shaped by culture, language, and appetite. What began as a reaction to destruction has evolved into an object of taste, and perception is the currency that allows it to thrive. In places where boar has always been part of the landscape, there's no novelty to it. It's eaten because it's there. It's cooked the way it's always been cooked, seasoned with whatever the land offers. These are not marketing decisions. They're habits, formed by time and necessity. The meat appears at harvest festivals, on winter tables, in stews that require patience. In those settings, wild boar isn't a luxury, it's just food. But in places where the animal represents danger, where headlines feature overturned bins and chewed-up irrigation lines, the narrative is different. There, eating wild boar isn't a tradition, it's a statement. It says, we've figured out how to turn our problems into products. The packaging reflects that. Glossy photos, elegant typography, claims of sustainability, minimal processing, clean protein. It's meant to feel local and ethical even when it isn't. This shift in tone creates distance. It lets consumers appreciate the idea without confronting the reality. The wildness is softened, the origins blurred. The boar, once seen charging through suburban streets or destroying vineyards, is now something you slow cook or serve with red wine. The messiness is gone, replaced by curated stories about free-range living and natural diets. It's no longer an animal that had to be stopped. It's now one that deserved to be tasted. Restaurants add to the illusion. On the plate, boar becomes synonymous with character. It's richer than pork, with a deeper flavor and firmer bite. That difference becomes a feature, not a flaw. In fine dining, uniqueness is currency. It allows chefs to present the dish as elevated, intentional, wild, in a curated way. Diners respond. They talk about the flavor, the texture, the origin, not the field it wrecked, or the diseases it may have carried. All of this happens while, just out of sight, the animal remains the same. Boars still run through farmland. They still carry risk. They're still tracked at night with thermal scopes, still gutted under fluorescent lights, still boxed, frozen, shipped. But the further the meat moves from the source, the more the story changes, until eventually the animal is forgotten and all that's left is an experience. This shift hasn't gone unnoticed. Critics raise concerns about what happens when demand starts driving decisions. Some producers, tempted by profit, may begin managing populations not to reduce them, but to maintain them. There are whispers of unofficial breeding, strategic releases, manipulated data to justify more hunting quotas. The line between management and cultivation becomes harder to see, and when that line blurs, the original problem, the damage, the threat, the ecological imbalance starts to lose urgency. But for now, the market rewards the illusion. Boar is branded, consumed, praised. The discomfort is buried under flavor. The complications are softened by distance. And somewhere, out in the fields or deep in the woods, another one waits, unaware it's part of an industry, unaware it's already been imagined on a menu. No one planned for this. It started with a problem, turned into a fix, and quietly became a business. The labels changed. The language softened. The animal stayed the same. It still tears through fields, still moves under cover of night, still multiplies faster than most can track. Yet its meat ships clean, frozen, neatly packaged. Wildness repackaged as value. The more demand grows, the harder it is to tell if this is still about control or just about supply. Some say it's balance, others call it a loophole. Either way, the containers keep moving, the plates keep filling, the boars keep coming. Somewhere a fence just broke. Somewhere a chef is planning a seasonal dish. In between, there's an animal that wasn't supposed to matter, now turned into a product most people never think to question.